An independent credit rating agency cuts U.S. ratings for a second time, saying there's been no tangible progress in reducing America's federal debt. For fresh protests in Saudi Arabia's oil-rich eastern province, people take to the streets of Qatif to call for the release of political prisoners. And Syria slams Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey and their Western backers, demanding they stop undermining Kofi Annan's mission by supporting armed gangs. You're watching the World News here on Press TV. We're coming to you live from our headquarters in Tehran. Many thanks for joining us this hour. Well, independent ratings agency Egan-Jones has downgraded the U.S. credit rating from a AA+ to AA. This is the second time Egan-Jones is downgrading America's credit rating. The agency argues that a lack of any tangible progress in cutting the federal debt and its continued rise to GDP are the main reasons behind the downgrade. Egan-Jones scrapped America's top-level AAA rating in July, 1 month before Standard & Poor's. Analysts say for the first time since World War II, U.S. debt to GDP exceeds 100%. They predict it will rise to 106% by the end of the year, calling it an inflection point. Meanwhile, stocks have mostly fallen amid renewed concerns about Europe's economy in the U.S. The S&P 500's loss for the week was 0.7%. It was its biggest weekly decline in 2012. The Dow Jones Industrial Average also ended lower. On Wednesday, a dreadful Spanish bond auction helped push down shares traded on Wall Street. Spain was forced to pay higher rates amid fresh concerns over strained public finances. Protesters in Saudi Arabia have held fresh rallies in the oil-rich eastern province. Well, the protests were held in the main city of Qatif and the nearby town of Awamiyah. The protesters are also calling for the government to release a prominent human rights activist, Mohammed Az-Zinadi. Now, the rights activist was shot and detained several weeks ago. Announced his death 2 days after his arrest, but new revelations show Zinadi is still alive and in custody, but in critical condition. Protesters in the eastern province have been holding a protest for over a year now. They're demanding basic human rights, an end to sectarian discrimination, and the release of political prisoners. Regime forces have killed several demonstrators during the uprising. Now in Bahrain, Saudi-backed forces have attacked protesters calling for the downfall of the regime. Well, the protesters had come out to protest the government's brutal crackdown in several towns and villages around the capital, Manama. Now, security forces used sound grenades and tear gas on protesters. Several people were injured and detained. Scores of people have been killed and thousands were arrested since Bahrain's revolution began back in mid-February 2011. Well, staying with Bahrain now, the daughter of prominent human rights activist Abdul Hadi Al-Khawaja says her father's health continues to deteriorate. The Al Khalifa regime continues to defy the national and international calls to release the activist who is on the verge of death. Here's a closer look at the story.
This is a newly released picture of jailed Bahraini human rights defender Abdul Hadi Al-Khawaja, who is struggling with life and death. Khawaja is in critical condition because of his now nearly 2-month hunger strike. His family has issued an urgent appeal to save his life, saying the activist may go into cardiac arrest at any time.
It is outrageous from this authority. It doesn't listen to the word calling for release of someone who doesn't even can talk.
Khawaja began his hunger strike to protest his illegal detention and a ruling by a Bahraini military court which sentenced him to life in prison. Last week, Amnesty International urged Manama to free him because of fears for his life. Protesters have been holding rallies on an almost daily basis calling for his release. But the Bahraini regime has ignored national and international outcry over his conditions.
Here we have a gross violation of human rights, and the United States is not really paying attention.
Khawaja is one among thousands of Bahrainis detained by the Al Khalifa regime since last year. Scores have been killed or tortured. The regime has not even spared senior citizens, women and children. People have been taking to the streets against the regime's brutality since the revolution began in February 2011. Initially demanding reforms, the popular protest movement faced a deadly crackdown by Saudi-backed regime forces. Bahrain has long been criticized for its rights record. International rights groups have accused the kingdom of failing to implement reforms demanded by an independent commission which investigated the deadly crackdown in June. The West and its media outlets continue their silence on the grave violations of human rights in the kingdom. Washington, which has its fifth fleet in Bahrain, has particularly been accused of double standard by failing to address the appalling repression of the pro-democracy movement in the island. Analysts predict that the piling up of popular resentment in Bahrain is bound to backfire against U.S. interests in the region.
Syria has once again lashed out at some Western states and their regional allies, including Saudi Arabia and Qatar, for their alleged support for what Damascus calls terrorist armed gangs. Syria's envoy to the UN has called for an end to logistic and financial support for the armed groups. This comes as the UN Arab League envoy to Syria, Kofi Annan, says he's received information that Damascus is implementing his peace plan aimed at ending the Syrian unrest. Here's more.
A kind of media terrorism and diplomatic terrorism.
Syria's envoy speaking to journalists at the United Nations headquarters in New York. Bashar Ja'fari has strongly condemned the West and its Arab allies, as well as Turkey, for continuing to supply weapons to the armed groups fighting the government of President Bashar al-Assad.
Of course we are in favor of peace, but we want all these external interferences in our domestic affairs to stop. The Qataris, the Saudis and Turkey are providing these armed groups with weapons. This is a violation of the international law.
Ja'fari also said foreign-backed opposition groups must give a commitment in writing not to take advantage of any withdrawal by government troops from Syrian cities.
You're dealing with a national state that is attempting to defend itself from infiltrated terrorist groups, which have, of course, acquired then a following among the malcontents and fanatics and deserters and criminal elements inside Syria. That's for sure.
Syria has agreed to a peace plan hammered out by the UN Arab League envoy Kofi Annan to end the unrest in the country. Annan's office says it has received information that Syrian forces have begun withdrawing from conflict areas.
What we expect on the 10th of April is that the Syrian government will have completed its withdrawal from populated centers, the withdrawal of military units from populated centers.
The Syrian unrest has left thousands of people dead and a trail of destruction in parts of the country. Damascus has frequently charged that some Western states, including the US and Arab arch-enemies of Syria, are behind the deadly unrest, giving credence to the allegations as promises made by these Arab countries to give the so-called Syrian National Council millions of dollars each month to pay for the salaries of all members of the armed groups fighting the Syrian government.
5 out of the 11 Iranian pilgrims kidnapped by an armed group in Syria have been released. Their release came after Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan visited Iran last week. The released pilgrims told Press TV about their 2-month captivity. They explained how they were abducted and how the armed group failed to get a false confession from them. They also said the kidnappers wanted them to say they'd been sent by the Iranian government to help in the Syrian military's operations against the armed groups that they call opposition fighters.
We arrived in Syria on February the 1st. Nearly 2 hours after leaving Idlib, Syrian opposition groups stormed our bus and took 11 of our men.
When they kidnapped us, they accused us of being there to fight them, that we'd been sent there by the Iranian government. But we told them in Arabic we were adults and farmers, that we'd never stick our nose into politics, that we didn't think our government was fighting them. We told them it was just they themselves, the Syrian nation, fighting within itself. However, they did not believe us at the time. They decided to let us go when they realized we were farmers and pilgrims.
One of the abductors brought the rifle, it was a Kalashnikov, and told us to stick it to our chest and say that we are Iranian forces sent to kill the Syrian people. We thought that way they wanted to press charges against us, find us guilty, and eventually kill us, and later say they killed us for this and that reason. But we told them we would not do such a thing. They threatened us. They said they weren't going to let us go and that they were going to kill us. We told them, no matter what you did, that even if they didn't let us go, we wouldn't do something like that. Later, they took us to an olive garden to make us make a confession in front of the camera. We asked them if we had to lie. They said yes, we just want to film this confession. But we said we wouldn't lie. In Arabic, we made them understand that lying is forbidden in Islam. They pressured us to do it and said if we didn't, they'd never release us. Still, we refused. When we were there, they gave us Arabian food, such as traditional Syrian meals. They treated us normally. Whatever they themselves ate, they'd give us to eat as well. We ate twice a day, lunch and dinner. Some of them treated us well, others were extremists.
Employees of the Arab satellite network Al Jazeera have once again accused the news channel of fabricating stories on Syria.
The reality on the ground in Syria is different from what is portrayed by Al Jazeera. The reality is much different. The truth is now just an opinion of the director. In Al Jazeera, I can even lie to benefit the production. When I told them about my resignation, they sat with me for hours trying to convince me not to quit. But my mind was already made up. After I submitted my resignation letter, my decision was firm. I knew I wasn't going to retreat on my decision.
Well, Ahmed is among 5 people to quit the channel, citing bias in its views toward Syria. The Qatar-based Al Jazeera has been accused of fabricating its news stories and even the footage it airs during its news broadcast. The channel's former staff say Al Jazeera follows the policies of the Qatari government. The channel is even suspected of smuggling communications equipment to armed militants in Syria from Turkey and Lebanon. Afghanistan says it will not allow Washington to run assassination drone attacks from its soil beyond 2014. Afghan Foreign Minister Zalmay Rasul has said that any U.S.-led foreign troops who remain in Afghanistan will not operate against neighboring countries. The comments come as the U.S. has frequently launched espionage and assassination drone operations against Iran and Pakistan. Last year, Iran downed a U.S. spy drone which was flying some 200 kilometers deep into the airspace. Washington also carries out frequent assassination drone strikes against Pakistan, claiming that they target militants. However, statistics show most victims are civilians. U.S.-led forces are scheduled to leave Afghanistan by the end of 2014.
Our Qatari brothers will help us to create the environment for tough discussion.
Well, you're watching the World News here on Press TV. A quick check of the headlines this hour. An independent credit rating agency cut U.S. ratings for a second time, saying there's been no tangible progress in reducing America's federal debt. Fresh protests in Saudi Arabia's oil-rich eastern province. People take to the streets of Qatif to call for the release of political prisoners. And Syria slams Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey and their Western backers, demanding they stop undermining Kofi Annan's mission by supporting armed gangs. On the next half of the bulletin, right here on Press TV, we'll bring you the latest on the situation in the crisis-hit Mali. Don't go away. Welcome back. Greek police have clashed with protesters in central Athens a day after a man committed suicide over economic hardship. Well, some protesters hurled rocks at police who used tear gas to disperse them. On Wednesday, several thousand protesters gathered in front of the Parliament building to voice their anger at the government's austerity measures. Demonstrators were further infuriated by the public suicide of a cash-strapped Greek pensioner early Wednesday. Greece is facing its worst financial crisis since World War II. The European Union and the International Monetary Fund have forced the government to implement harsh austerity measures in return for financial aid. Rising unemployment, higher taxes, and shrinking wages have all made life hard for ordinary Greeks. Well, Europe is getting ready to celebrate Easter, but despite the positive mood, there's one thing people worry about: the economy. The EU is now in a recession. Fresh numbers indicate that unemployment has reached an almost 15-year high and the economy has shrank even more. Press TV's Yelda Sadakova reports.
Easter is here, and in the capital of Europe, Brussels, many are preparing to mark the occasion and enjoy their days off. But this holiday season, one thing is weighing on the minds of many across Europe: the economic crisis, the biggest one the EU has seen.
I'm a little worried about the Europe, and Spain and Greece and Belgium too. We have been to a restaurant today, and the owner he said it's hard to be a restaurant owner also in Belgium. So I'm a little worried.
And this woman says that although things have not become too difficult for her, she's worried about the future of her children.
Because everything is more expensive, and we live in a world that's very hard and for everyone to find a job, and it's difficult.
Fresh economic data confirms that it is getting harder to find a job. Unemployment in the euro area reached an almost 15-year high in February, 10.8%. The area's retail sales have also shrank slightly, and the eurozone economy contracted by 0.3% in the last quarter of 2011. Back then, 7 euro countries were already in a recession.
We should be worried about growth across the European Union. We have problems which were there before the crisis, and the crisis has aggravated them. But in this immediate crisis, when we look at the euro crisis, the biggest problem is that certain countries are performing rather well in relative to the others.
Germany and a handful of other countries are doing well, but nations on the periphery of the eurozone, like Greece, Spain and Portugal, are in a recession. This, economists say, is creating a gap, so Europe needs growth measures tailored to its struggling countries. But such measures have yet to transpire. Instead, policymakers have largely focused on budget cuts, which stifle growth. The grim economic data and the overall situation point to one thing, experts say: that the current EU recession may not be short-lived like politicians say it might be. Yıldız Sarakova, Press TV, Brussels.
British broadcaster Sky News has admitted hacking into the email account of a man who faked his own death. Sky News, partly owned by Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation, says it authorized a journalist to access the emails of John Darwin and his wife. Darwin faked his death in a life insurance scam before moving to Panama to start a new life. Murdoch's media empire has been heavily criticized in recent months for hacking scandals. A storm of phone hacking allegations forces British newspaper Wing to shut down the 168-year-old News of the World tabloid last July. The tabloid admitted to hacking into the phones of crime victims, war dead, and celebrities to generate stories. Meanwhile, British police are witnessing their reputation taking a further beating after plunging into a racist crisis. Scotland has revealed 7 new complaints of racial abuse referred to the police watchdog. Now the Metropolitan Police is facing fresh questions over the conduct of its officers.
Scotland Yard is under mounting pressure to clamp down on racism in its ranks. This comes after more damning evidence emerged of a police officer caught on tape racially abusing a young black man. The incident occurred after last year's summer unrest, but has just recently been made public.
You'll always be a nigger. Yeah, that's your problem. That's your problem. You're trying to tell me I'm racist. You're trying to tell me racist comments. That's your problem. KF805. Yeah? I'll be back. Don't worry, KF45. All the time. I'll always be a nigger. That's what you said, yeah? You'll always have black skin colour. Yeah, no problem, mate. No problem. I hear this all the time. Don't hide behind your colour, yeah? I get it all the time, officer. Don't hide behind your colour. All the time. Don't worry, yeah?
In another incident, a police officer was captured on CCTV assaulting a 15-year-old black teenager who had been taken into custody. Police say 8 officers and a civilian police staff have been suspended for alleged racist incidents. At least 3 other officers have also been placed on restricted duties. In total, 20 officers are under investigation in relation to claims of racism. However, there is a sense of mistrust and skepticism among the black community in the UK despite assurances that law enforcement in the country is cleaning up its act. Equality campaigners are worried about a possible failure of the Crown Prosecution Service in filing charges against the accused officers despite the evidence. They believe political influence in such a sensitive case may help the accused officers escape justice.
There is some independence in this police complaints commission, but it's such a sensitive subject that political influence starts to play. So I think the confidence varies. The lack of confidence is in the black community, where they feel their complaints are not being investigated.
The Muslim Brotherhood's Khairat al-Shatr has submitted his candidacy for the Egyptian presidency. Thousands of his supporters showed up at the Supreme Presidential Electoral Commission headquarters to cheer him on. Press TV's Karim Gamaluddin has more in the following report.
In the presence of thousands and thousands of supporters, Muslim Brotherhood figure and presidential hopeful Khairat al-Shatr officially files his recommendation forms to run in the upcoming presidential elections. The director of al-Shatr's campaign told Press TV that the Muslim Brotherhood fielded a candidate from within its own ranks in the forthcoming election in order to press for reform and to achieve the demands and objectives of the revolution.
This is a historic event. We have nominated al-Shatr not for the group's interest, but for him to serve the whole nation and to achieve the demands of the revolution.
Also, the Muslim Brotherhood, Egypt's most powerful political group, asserted that their decision to run a candidate is based on the belief that grievous dangers threaten the process of democratic transformation in the country.
Our goals are not met yet. Neither the SCAF nor its cabinet have done so. and this is why we're here, to accomplish the demands of the revolution.
تضيع على مصر تفيد تضر مصر يوما بعد يوم كان لابد من هذا القرار.
Tensions between the country's ruling junta and the Muslim Brotherhood have hiked, especially after the army generals have neglected the party's repetitive calls to dismiss the interim government as it has failed to manage the transition and to resolve any crisis in the country.
Analysts say the Muslim Brotherhood's policy by fielding the group's deputy head for Egypt's upcoming president will inevitably alter the course of the presidential campaign and will potentially increase tensions between the country's most powerful political group and the ruling army generals. Karim Gamaluddin, Press TV, Cairo.
Separatist rebels in northern Mali have announced a ceasefire. They say they've captured enough territory to carve out a desert homeland.
There was a problem which could not be solved through peaceful means. But as of today, Thursday, April 5th, 2012, we are ending our military offensive in the territory previously known as northern Mali. Our border with Mali is the town of Douentza in southern Mali. The other borders remain the same. The whole Azawad territory is now under our control. We want peace and justice, and we are working towards that end.
The ceasefire comes as military chiefs of 15 West African nations meet in the Ivory Coast to discuss a possible military intervention in Mali. They want to reverse the coup that deposed Mali's president last month and preserve the country's territorial integrity. Meanwhile, Mali's coup leader Amadou Sanogo has sent a delegation to Nigeria. Sanogo is hoping to receive assistance to restore Mali's borders. Separatist rebels launched their insurgency in January following the coup in mid-March. They took control of the three main northern cities of Kidal, Gao, and Timbuktu. With that, we come to an end of World News here on Press TV. Top of the hour, I'll be back with the news in brief. Don't go away.